Hey mini enthusiasts, how are you doing? Welcome back. I hope you're all well and I hope you're having a great day. Today I'm going to share with you my top 5 tips for storing a Mini up over winter. So my top tip number 1 is the battery. We're going to disconnect it, but first we need to make sure it's fully charged, and that's really important because the battery loses about 0.1 volts per month even when it's disconnected. Now that doesn't sound much, but consider the battery is completely empty at 10.5 volts. So there's only about 2 volts which are usable. And once it drops below 12.5 volts, the battery will start to sulfate, which means it will start to damage the battery permanently. So we want to make sure there's enough voltage in there to stop it dropping below 12.5 volts. So we'll fully charge it, and that should give us a rested voltage of around about 12.7 volts. So 2 to 3 months time without being charged, that should be absolutely fine. But any longer than 3 months and we want to top the battery back up again, even though it's disconnected from the car. So let's get it charged up, then we'll disconnect it, and that battery's going to be good for 3 months. So tip number 2 is fuel. We're going to fill the fuel tank to the brim, and I'll explain why. When the fuel tank is empty, it's a big open space, it's a metal tank, and it's ideal for building up condensation. Condensation gets water droplets in the fuel and creates problems in the future. If the fuel tank is full, there's a very, very small air gap at the top of the tank, so there's nowhere for condensation to build up. So we're going to fill the tank to full. My advice would be though, modern fuels will last about 6 months before they start to go off. They start to deteriorate. So if we're parking it for less than 6 months, fill the tank full. If we're going to leave it for longer than 6 months, it might actually be worth draining the fuel out. Coming in at tip number 3 from me is tyre pressures. So tyres will naturally deflate at approximately 1 to 2 psi per month, depending on condition. Now we're going to leave PL parked up for around about 4 months. So let's assume that the tyre pressures are going to go down by about 4 psi over that time with it being parked up. So my normal tyre pressure setting for PL is about 28 psi. So we're actually going to set it to 32 psi. So at the end of storage, when we come out to use it, the tyre pressures should be there or thereabouts correct. So we're going to ensure the tyres are about 4 or 5 psi over what they should be. Obviously don't grossly overinflate the tyres, but we're going to use about 1 psi per month. My tyres are usually 28 psi. So I've inflated them to about 32, 33 psi. That means after 4 months, when I come to use it, the tyres should be roughly at the right pressure. The other reason for doing this is if we let the tyres deflate too much, Obviously you get a larger footprint on the floor, then you get more deformation of the tyre, and that can actually damage the casing of the tyre. It can cause tyres to go egg-shaped, and I've had this happen before on Vinny, where the tyres went egg-shaped, where they were left partially deflated. So like I say, we're just going to overinflate them a small amount to allow for a little bit of loss while it's stored up, and in 4 months or so time, they should be absolutely spot on.
Coming in at tip number 4, it's an easy one. Just give the car a really good clean. Make sure there's no contaminants on it, but make sure it's fully dry as well. I recommend giving it a run round the block, making sure all the brakes are dry before it's parked up.
So lastly, we move on to step 5. So step 1, we charged the battery and disconnected it. Step 2, we filled the fuel tank. Step 3, we set the tyre pressures. Step 4, we gave the bodywork a good clean and we made sure it's dry. And now step 5 is to cover the cars. So whether they are outside or inside for storage, it is well worth investing in a car cover to keep contaminants off the paint. It won't stop things knocking into the cars, but it will stop any fallout, dust, dirt, grime, any debris getting onto the paint surface and sitting there over the winter. So well worth investing in a car cover. Let's get these cars covered up and then they are good to go, and we'll see them again in about 4 months' time.